I knew that there are unpleasant people who like to destroy other people's marriages. They get to know married women, and thanks to their charisma, they charm women. But as it usually happens, I thought it wouldn't affect me, and my wife is smart enough. But how wrong I was about my wife's loyalty. I pressed the doorbell and took a step back, anticipating our host's arrival. Draping my arm around my beloved Heather, I drew her close for a swift kiss. My affection for her knew no bounds. She had brought me 4 years of unparalleled happiness. Tonight, we were off to celebrate with my closest friend, Doug Bevers, at his New Year's Eve bash in his grand mansion. While I was eager to catch up with Doug, I was even more excited to spend the evening and welcome the new year in style with my wife. Just as I was about to ring the bell again, Doug finally swung open the door with a wide grin, loudly welcoming us inside. Judging by the multitude of cars parked on the street and in his yard, I knew this would be a sizable gathering, but the sheer number of people bustling around inside took me aback. Doug embraced Heather warmly, planting a gentle kiss on her cheek before ushering her indoors. He then turned to me, offering a firm handshake before stepping aside to let me enter. A maid took our coats and vanished with them. Doug walked between us and exclaimed, "Thank goodness you're here. I really dislike when my gatherings become this large, but it seems necessary to invite everyone. I have either business dealings with them or social obligations, except for a select few like you two. Clarissa's somewhere around, probably avoiding advances as usual." As the evening wore on, Heather and I indulged in dancing, eating, and drinking more than we should have. We had no concerns knowing we had a bed upstairs whenever we needed it. We were among the few couples invited to stay the night, so we didn't have to worry about driving intoxicated, calling a cab, or having one of us stay sober as a designated driver. In the investment business, I've achieved moderate success. Well, let's be honest. I'm one of the top-performing brokers in my office and rank in the top quarter company-wide. That said, I was familiar with many of the individuals in the room. Doug's assessment resonated with me. Quite a few of them were lecherous, if not worse. My wife, Heather, a stunning woman, faced unwanted advances just like Clarissa, Doug's wife. Throughout the evening, I seized the chance to network, mingling with existing clients and pitching to affluent prospects. While I trusted Heather completely, I couldn't deny a twinge of jealousy. I kept a vigilant watch over her, intervening whenever I sensed a man crossing the line from friendly banter to something more. Each time I stepped in to rescue her, Heather rewarded me with a smile, a tender kiss, and a whispered, "Thank you." This routine played out as usual that evening. I'd approach whenever I spotted her in an uncomfortable situation, and she'd express her gratitude with a touch, a smile, and a brief moment together before we parted ways once more. As the evening progressed, many guests departed, leaving only those who intended to celebrate the new year with our host. I began to observe a particular man closely shadowing Heather, almost as if he were stalking her. He remained near her at all times, his gaze fixed on her. I recognized his demeanor. He was infatuated with her, consumed by desire, and seizing every opportunity to pursue her. Initially, Heather would disregard him or walk away. However, as the night went on, she began to spend more time with him, even smiling and laughing at his words. Occasionally, she would delicately touch his arm. This behavior was unusual for Heather. She never prolonged her interactions with men who approached her, especially strangers. Just before midnight, Doug noticed me observing them and approached me. He remarked, "That's Jonathan Douglas with Heather. He's notorious for being a womanizer. I didn't even invite him. He came as a date with one of the women I invited. I haven't seen them together since you and Heather arrived." Doug was standing next to me, looking around the room carefully. Curiosity flashed across his face before he spoke. "You know, I have a feeling that Douglas's companion may have already left. Earlier, I watched him follow Heather for quite a long time, engrossed, as it seemed to me, in a lively conversation. She has not been seen anywhere since. Look, this man is creating problems with a capital letter. He is married, but spends more time apart from his wife than with her. He tends to target married women or those who have what he desires. He usually takes care of married women, and single rich women, as he believes, can be manipulated. In fact, this is puzzling. given his considerable fortune. Keep a close eye on him. He has eloquence, and I'm sure few girls will be able to refuse him. That evening, I found myself intervening between Heather and Jonathan for the third time. Jonathan shot me a hostile look, much like he had done on previous occasions when I had separated them, and then made a patronizing comment as I led Heather away. However, this time, Heather didn't express gratitude. Instead, she looked upset and asked, "Stan, what's wrong with you tonight?" I was enjoying my conversation with Jonathan. Why did you feel the need to intervene? He's not like the usual creeps you rescue me from. He's genuinely interesting and has some hilarious stories. He's running for mayor and has been sharing anecdotes about the people he encounters during his campaign. When he learned that I work in my company's public information and advertising department, he started asking me for advice on how to communicate his mayoral message effectively to voters. I think he might even offer me a job, darling. Networking with him could really benefit me. Imagine the possibilities if I were to secure a role in his administration. I'm not too concerned, Heather. I have reservations about him, and I don't want him near you. Doug believes he's trouble, a notorious womanizer. I've heard unsettling things about him, and I want you to be safe. According to what I've heard, the role he's interviewing you for might involve compromising situations. Heather shot me a sharp look momentarily. I could sense her anger flicker across her face, and I feared I might have ruined things. But then she grinned. As she leaned in to peck my cheek, she remarked, "Aw, that's cute. Seems like you're feeling a bit jealous. But there's no need to worry, darling. You're mine, through and through." We were swept back into the crowd before I could fully process her words. It wasn't until later that I realized she had said I was hers, not the other way around. In that moment, I paused and pondered whether it was a slip of the tongue or if she was hinting at something deeper. 3 months later, I found myself recalling that night in excruciating detail. Over the past 2 months, things had become difficult at home. Following the party, Heather started arriving home late from some of her meetings or visits to her parents. When I questioned her about her tardiness, she became defensive and angry, claiming she either lost track of time or had to finish up a project before leaving. Additionally, she began volunteering for the local Republican Party after work, which consumed more of her time. Heather, known for her exceptional managerial skills, took on the role of the local campaign headquarters voluntary office manager and offered advice on public information initiatives. From what little I heard, she effectively managed the chaos and became a highly regarded volunteer. Like many unsuspecting husbands who have been cuckolded, I noticed that as Heather spent more and more time away from home, our bed life suffered. I was getting rejections more and more often, but still, when it happened, there was no longer the same passion. Now it looks like she was just doing her marital duty without love. She always had an excuse that she was tired, it was too late, or we didn't have time. However, the truth remained the same. She definitely did not like being close to me, compared to what it was before. One day, while discussing the recent issues in my marriage with Doug, he appeared concerned. Eventually, he confessed, "Stan, I'm growing anxious. I fear I may have contributed to the downfall of your marriage. Lately, there have been rumors circulating about Jonathan involving himself with another married woman. It said he encountered her at a New Year's event, and we both know where he was and who he spent most of his time with that evening. Allegedly, she's a volunteer in his mayoral campaign." I felt a wave of dizziness and momentarily lost my breath. Doug observed my reaction and remarked, "Stan, what's wrong? Suddenly you're as pale as a ghost." I gazed at Doug for a moment before speaking. Heather has started volunteering for the Republican Party at their office after work and on Saturdays. She consistently comes home late and refuses to discuss her activities. Whenever I bring it up, she becomes defensive and angry. On the nights she's latest, she gets even angrier if I approach her, and almost becomes violent if I try to initiate intimacy. Doug leaned back in his chair, pursing his lips briefly before saying, "Stan, I'm going to look into this for you. And if it turns out he's betrayed my trust by getting involved with the wife of my closest friend, I'll make sure he pays for it. It would upset me if he flirted with any married woman at one of my gatherings, but it's even worse to abuse my hospitality, by pursuing your wife. I should have asked him to leave when his date did, but I was too concerned with being a good host. If I'm the reason for your troubles, my friend, I promise to do everything in my power to set things right for you. I feel I should elaborate a bit on Doug. He's my closest friend, someone I trust implicitly. I'd trust him with my life, without hesitation. I'd even trust him alone with my wife if they'd both been celibate for a year. He's unwaveringly loyal and would never betray me. Our bond is akin to that of brothers. Doug is exceptionally intelligent, perhaps the most brilliant person I've ever encountered. We attended the same high school, where he was the valedictorian while I struggled to place in the top 10% of our graduating class of 223 students. He attended college for a year but found it unfulfilling. Despite rarely attending classes, he effortlessly maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA. Eventually, he delved into finance, teaching himself the intricacies of investing and finance. Naturally, his interest in business and finance stemmed from the inheritance he received during his first year of college, totaling just over $70,000. This windfall came following the passing of his grandparents. Unlike many of his peers, he didn't squander the money. Instead, he upgraded to a better-used pickup truck and wisely invested the remainder in the stock market. Initially guided by a broker's advice, he soon grew disillusioned after realizing that the recommended stocks were merely trendy picks, benefiting only the broker and brokerage firm. This frustration prompted Doug to take matters into his own hands. He immersed himself in financial news, avidly watched CNBC, and delved into extensive research. Ultimately, he opted to open an account with a discount online brokerage, transferring his entire wealth into it, and embarking on a journey of independent investing. Since Doug's inaugural solo trade, he began accumulating wealth, far exceeding what he gained through purported experts. His timing was fortunate, as he entered the market during the late 1980s technology boom and the dot-com frenzy. Engaging in numerous high-flying stocks, he experienced both gains and losses, but ultimately multiplied his nest egg significantly. Sensibly, he knew when to exit amidst turmoil, transitioning his investments to safer mainstream options, thus capitalizing on market uptrends. He acquired shares in Berkshire Hathaway at around $17,000 per share, selling them at $72,357 per share 3 years later. By then, he had amassed considerable wealth and engaged in various ventures, from venture capital to real estate investments, with fellow entrepreneurs. After graduating from college, I spent 4 years working as a salesman for a restaurant supply chain. However, I grew weary of the constant travel and became increasingly serious about Heather. Consequently, I transitioned into a career as a stockbroker, where I had the opportunity to manage a portion of Doug's considerable wealth. Initially, I harbored doubts about Doug entrusting me with his investments, suspecting it was more out of friendship than necessity. Despite feeling like I was receiving charity, Doug convinced me of my value in diversifying his investments across different brokerages for safety and staying informed about potential market movements related to his companies. While neither of us engaged in any activities resembling insider trading, occasionally I stumbled upon valuable insights that I could share with him. Our partnership proved fruitful, leading to mutual prosperity. Doug also referred many of his friends and acquaintances to me for full-service brokerage, further contributing to my success in making profitable trades for them. Doug didn't have a job outside of his home. He dedicated 8 to 10 hours a day to hard work, solely for his own benefit. He delved into stock research, trading, and lived a lavish lifestyle. He made efforts to fully involve me and Heather in his circle, often inviting us to various charitable events at his own expense. Occasionally, I covered some expenses for gatherings myself, thanks to my broker expense account. We accompanied Doug to political gatherings, mingling with influential figures in our region. I believe we attended every party Doug hosted at his residence. After Doug and I had our conversation on Friday evening, we had plans to attend a political fundraiser priced at $500 per plate, with Doug and his partner. Once again, Doug was treating Heather and me. However, this time, Heather seemed even more reluctant to join us than usual. Despite her reluctance, I insisted she come with me, a decision I regret to this day. Perhaps if I hadn't, I might have remained blissfully unaware of the impending disaster our marriage was hurtling towards, at least for a little while longer. Unfortunately, that dinner marked the beginning of the end for us. Upon arrival, I realized it was a fundraising dinner where an incumbent state Senate candidate would speak in support of other local candidates. The ticket proceeds were going to the state Republican Party, with some benefiting local politicians. What I didn't anticipate was that the guest of honor would be none other than the mayoral candidate for our city, Jonathan "Asshole" Douglas. As we entered, I noticed Jonathan by the front of the room, chatting amiably with several important guests. Heather seemed to withdraw slightly, prompting me to glance her way to see what was amiss. She stood there, fixated on Jonathan, her expression radiant, like that of a woman deeply smitten. It dawned on me then that I might have lost my wife's affections. "What's wrong?" I asked. Heather seemed to snap out of her trance, offering me a weak smile. "I'm sorry, darling, I just didn't realize who this event was honoring." Her guilt was palpable, though I couldn't help but wonder if there was more to it. Still, I chose to remain silent. After all, she should have known that Jonathan would be present, given her part-time work at the campaign headquarters. It suddenly dawned on me why she had been so reluctant to attend in the first place. I glanced over at Doug and caught him observing our brief exchange. He then turned to give Jonathan a stern look before plastering a smile on his face and gently guiding Heather to her seat by placing his hand on the small of her back. After helping her settle into her chair, he proceeded to seat Clarissa to his left. As I passed by him while he was arranging the seating, he murmured, "I apologize, Stan. I wasn't aware he was on the guest list when I invited you." I could see the concern on her face, buddy. "Hopefully I'm mistaken, but I have a meeting scheduled for Monday with a friend I'd like you to meet. How about lunch around 11:30? Once Heather finished her meal, she excused herself to visit the restroom. I noticed Jonathan stand up and leave through a different exit as soon as she departed from the table. Contemplating for a moment, I began to rise to follow him. Doug then intervened, placing a reassuring hand on my arm and saying, "Hold on, Stan. It's been handled, and if it's her, it's too late now anyway. Let's wait until Monday, okay?" Later that night, I once again lost sight of Heather and went searching for her upon my return from the restroom. Somehow I ended up on stage and behind the curtains. Amidst faint moans and hushed voices, I immediately recognized one as Heather's. Anger surged within me instantly, propelling me towards the source of the voices. However, I stumbled over a rope, causing a disturbance. In a whisper, I heard Heather say, "Oh, someone's approaching. I must leave, darling. It wouldn't be wise for either of us to be caught now. See you at the office. I love you." There was a quick smack, as if she had given a hurried kiss, followed by hurried footsteps fading away towards the opposite end of the stage. I attempted to follow, but it was too late to apprehend what I presumed to be my unfaithful wife and Jonathan. As I retraced my steps, Doug intercepted me in the corridor, his expression dark and stormy. He seized my arm, compelling me to halt and meet his gaze. "Stan," he exclaimed, frustration evident in his voice, "I specifically instructed you to hold off. My team needs time to gather intel before you act rashly. If she's truly cheating, and I'm inclined to believe she is, we require evidence to strategize and seek appropriate retribution against her lover, and to secure the best outcome for you in any legal proceedings. Your current approach would only lead to trouble with the law." After managing to calm me down somewhat, Doug continued, "I observed them scurrying down the adjacent hallway from here. They paused by the entrance to the auditorium, with her anxiously scanning the area for you. Failing to spot you, she grew apprehensive and told him she mistook someone else for you, someone wandering around looking for them. Now you're dealing with a suspicious cheater, making it trickier to catch them in the act. When we returned to the table, we made a spectacle of it. Ensuring Heather and a few others noticed, we exchanged laughs and passed a pocket flask between us. Heather shot me a glare as I took my seat beside her, inquiring where we had been. Just then, Clarissa approached Doug, enveloping him in a hug. She grinned at us, declaring, "All right, you two. Next time you sneak off to the car for some booze, either take me along or face the consequences. Now let me have a sip of that flask." We observed Heather relax slightly before she turned to Clarissa, exclaiming, "Oh my God, is that what these two have been doing? I was wondering where they disappeared to." Clarissa chuckled and remarked, "Yeah, I attempted to intercept them for my portion before they made it indoors, but clearly they outpaced me." Later, while dancing, it was my turn with Clarissa. She melded into my embrace, and once when I attempted to glance over my shoulder, she resisted. Placing a tender kiss on my cheek, she said, "No, Stan. You really shouldn't look over there. Just dance with me and try to enjoy the evening. I understand what you're going through right now, and trust me, it will worsen. Just remember, Doug and I are here for you and we'll always be here for you." I eased up a bit and returned her gentle kiss. "Thanks for stepping in during the earlier conversation. I was on edge, and Doug seems to think losing my cool would have been disastrous. I'm itching to give that jerk a piece of my mind." The following week and weekend were tough. I was fluctuating between fear and anger. Deep down, I knew Heather had checked out emotionally, and it was only a matter of time before she left physically. We hadn't been happy for weeks. Mentally, I was starting to drift away from her, even though I couldn't confirm if she was cheating. If it wasn't infidelity, then something else was wrong because we weren't the affectionate couple we used to be. At long last, the moment arrived for my meeting with Doug and his companion. I had a strong suspicion that his companion would be a private investigator. My nerves were in shambles and my stomach churned with acidity, leaving me feeling queasy. Beneath the surface, anger simmered, visible to the other two men. I was both fearful of what I might uncover and eager to discover it. As I approached the table, Doug rose and greeted me with a handshake followed by a hug. He then introduced me to his companion, Simon Hobbs, confirming my suspicion that he was indeed an investigator. We settled at the table and glanced through the menu before placing our orders. With the waitress taking our order, Doug proposed, "Shall we address the unpleasant matters first?" He glanced at his companion and then back at me. The private investigator reached into his briefcase and took out a large envelope. Handing it to me, he said, "We have set up surveillance on your wife and Mr. Douglas in accordance with Mr. Beaver's instructions. The surveillance continued for 20 days from the moment of our participation until last Saturday evening. Throughout this period, we observed the subjects having lunch together every day, except on Sundays, when your wife apparently stayed at home all the time. They dined at various locations around the city, mostly in upscale hotels, after which they retired to a room rented by Mr. Douglas's campaign. On 8 separate occasions, we managed to get into the room under the guise of room service personnel. Each time they were caught as a couple in love. The report includes photos of the room and the subjects. In addition, we recorded an audio recording of each meeting by placing a microphone under the door of the room. From our observation, it can be seen that the subjects cheated during each visit to the hotels. We have documented numerous cases of inappropriate contacts in and outside the campaign headquarters over the course of several days. In particular, we have photographs showing individuals doing this 3 times at the campaign headquarters and once at a party at a local club attended by some of Mr. Douglas's colleagues and supporters. One particularly revealing incident that we have documented is that Mr. Douglas used your wife to gain the support of the Municipal Employees Union. They met with Union President Stephen Negrano at the Gentlemen's Club, where he showed considerable interest in your wife. We have pictures of her sitting on his lap. In addition, my operative managed to record part of their conversation unnoticed. Let's listen to this excerpt from the recording before continuing. Simon placed a small laptop on the table and started playing a snippet from the DVD. He said, "You'll receive a copy of this DVD in your report. But I wanted to discuss this incident with you before we conclude our meeting. My operative was very concerned about this information, and I imagine your lawyer will be too." Doug and I leaned forward, watching and listening to the next segment. The footage shows Heather sitting between Jonathan and Stephen. The 2 men leaned over to talk to her. 2 men showed interest in Heather. We heard Heather ask him to stop, but he told her, "Heather, I can feel how excited you are, but I also know that you like it. Just relax and go with the flow." Calming down, Jonathan leaned over to Heather and kissed her gently. As Jonathan leaned back in his chair, Stephen reached out and pulled her towards him. Heather hissed, "Stop it, Stephen." Stephen looked at Jonathan and said, "Jonathan, I think you know what you need to do to get the union's support. I want to spend the weekend with this woman. If I receive this offer, I will make sure that the union supports your candidacy." Heather tensed and tried to get up, hissing, "No, this will never happen. Now let me go." Stephen just looked at Jonathan with raised eyebrows. Jonathan swallowed and leaned over to Heather. He said, "Dear, we really need your support. Please just go with him and help me with this. I mean, it will help secure our future. Just tell your asshole husband that you have plans for the weekend." In the video, Heather looked shocked and resisted for a moment. Then we saw her relax. Around this time, the club's manager came up to the table. He looked at Heather, then at the men on either side of her. He seemed nervous and stammered when he said, "Mr. Negrano, I missed a lot of things, but I was warned that you and the boys were becoming too conspicuous. Lieutenant Jones told me that the boss asked some of his detectives to come to the club and try to reduce the number of antics like the one you and the lady had. If they catch us letting this kind of thing happen, they'll fire me. Could you please go with this lady to one of the back rooms or to the hotel? Please, sir. This business is all I have to make a living." Stephen grinned and glanced at one of the burly men sitting across from him. He said, "Hi, Ralph, why don't you give Joe a couple thousand for his trouble? The little lady and I are going to Doubleday for the weekend. Set it up for me, okay? Set it up as a meeting of union leaders, as we usually do." Feeling my anger rising, I started to get up. I growled, "That lying cheater. She disappeared last weekend. She called me on Friday evening and said she had been assigned an urgent damage reduction project for her employer and was flying to San Francisco." Doug and Simon picked me up and sat me back down in my seat. Simon said, "Please, sir, just wait. I want to show you one more piece, and then we'll let you read the report for yourself. We have a few ideas on this subject that I would like to discuss with you, but I thought you might want to watch the DVD first before we discuss them. Now, my operative has stopped filming at the club and called for backup. My operatives managed to beat Stanley to the DoubleTree. After his thugs checked him in, he and Heather went to the bar for a couple of drinks. My operatives, dressed in the uniforms we got at the hotel, followed the bandits into the room. When they opened the door, my men followed them. After the bandits finished checking the room, my people began to arrange pillows, flowers, and other decorations. Simon grinned and went on. The elderly gentleman even dispatched his assistant to fetch fresh flowers and additional champagne, providing them with a reason to extend their stroll through the city. We successfully installed several cameras and microphones in the primary area, and 2 bedrooms. When your wife and Stanley eventually returned to the room, they were both inebriated. The cameras captured these moments and more. Simon put the DVD back in its place on his small computer, and horrifying footage opened up in front of me. First, my wife cheated on me with one man. Then another came, and it all lasted for a very long time. I was disgusted to see it all. After that, Simon turned off his computer. He glanced at me briefly before saying, "Your wife stayed in the hotel room until checkout time on Monday. During her stay, she entered into relationships with all the leaders of the Municipal Employees Union, as well as with Stephen. We overheard conversations about the possible misuse of union funds and the use of union employees to support Jonathan's mayoral campaign. On Saturday evening, Jonathan visited the room himself. We have photographic evidence of this, as well as records detailing their plans for financial fraud if Jonathan is elected. In addition, we have photos showing Senator Nussbaum and 2 judges who entered into a relationship with your wife and Jonathan Douglas." The investigator glanced at me before continuing. He stated, "While you were trying to catch your wife and Mr. Douglas at a campaign dinner, they were about to make another contact. They had just started when your wife heard you and made him stop. That's when they ran away from you. We also have photographic evidence of the incident. It would be preferable if you didn't interfere. Photographs of this kind in such an environment would be highly compromising. We planned to take pictures with the crowd in the background. Fortunately, you avoided getting caught or making a scene that could further undermine your efforts to resolve this issue in your favor. We have provided you with a copy of the entire dossier, sir, and we can provide it to your lawyer if you wish. Our investigation costs include any necessary testimony in the local court. However, I suggest that we continue monitoring for possible criminal prosecution. Although, as a rule, this is the work of law enforcement agencies, providing them and the FBI with evidence of misuse of campaign funds, and conspiracy will make our accusations more credible. Besides, if you file for divorce and your wife ends up in jail, you can expect a more favorable settlement. Despite the fact that I expected this, I must admit that I was deeply upset and shocked. I couldn't imagine the disrespect my wife showed at a time when she was under scrutiny. The documents showed that she was in love with Jonathan and openly talked about leaving me for him. She was looking forward to the position he promised her in his administration if he became mayor. What struck me even more was her willingness to spend the weekend at the Doubletree Hotel with her lover and his friends. Although I knew that Heather was ambitious and admired powerful people, I couldn't imagine what she was capable of to get ahead. It made me feel almost physically ill. I barely touched my meal, and I noticed Doug didn't eat much either. After the investigator left, we had a few drinks. We sat in silence, lost in our thoughts, until Doug spoke up saying, "Stan, I'm truly sorry for what happened to your marriage. I take full responsibility for the troubles you're facing, and I'm committed to making it right. I can't erase the past, but I'll do everything in my power to support you. I'll help you find a good lawyer for the divorce and provide any other assistance you need to get back on your feet." I pushed my plate away and met Doug's gaze. "Then start searching for that lawyer," I replied. I was close to giving her an ultimatum about her behavior before I found out about her affair. Now, there's no chance I'll stay with her. I can't believe she betrayed me like that. Did she change, or did I just never know who she truly was? And as for Heather's infidelity, you know it's not your fault. You don't owe me anything for that. On Thursday, Doug phoned me and exclaimed, "Hey, buddy, I've found you a top-notch lawyer. She despises dishonesty and always supports the innocent party in divorce cases. Plus, she's fiercely against influential individuals who exploit their status to mistreat women. If you handle this correctly, you can not only divorce Heather and retain most of your assets, but also get retribution from Jonathan." Doug provided me with the attorney's contact details. I reached out to her later that day to arrange a consultation. When I identified myself to her assistant, she informed me that they were anticipating my call and had tentatively scheduled a meeting for the following morning at 9 a.m., pending my availability. I confirmed the appointment and received a list of documents and information to bring along for the initial discussion. When I showed up the following morning, I was promptly led into the office. I was struck by my new lawyer's professionalism, and we quickly engaged in a cordial conversation about my objectives and wishes regarding the impending divorce proceedings. I conveyed to my new attorney, Sally, my desire to dissolve the marriage while retaining all assets, fully aware that such an outcome might be unlikely. I expressed my intention to pursue legal action against my spouse for every possible claim, aiming to inflict significant repercussions, including derailing his mayoral election bid and leaving him financially destitute. Sally grinned and reclined in her chair, gently swaying it as she pondered. After a moment, she smiled and inquired, "Are you truly inclined to pursue that course, or do you aim to financially devastate him, tarnish his reputation, and ensure his imprisonment? With proper execution, we can likely secure a jail sentence for him." I've already perused sections of the private investigator's report, and it's compelling. I understand the strain this puts on your marriage, but the evidence it contains is too damning to ignore. It's imperative that we hand over the investigator's findings to the authorities, as numerous federal laws have been breached. If you permit me to do so before initiating divorce proceedings, we can inflict a more agonizing retribution. Filing first might afford him the chance to flee and evade capture for a while. I couldn't care less about what happens to him and those other jerks who were involved with Heather, as long as they suffer greatly. I know Heather is deeply involved in this whole situation, but she wouldn't have been able to do anything with him if he hadn't been willing. From what I observed when I assumed they first met, he was the one making advances. He pursued her until she gave in to his charms and ended up in his bed. Remember, it takes two to tango. She always wore her rings, so he knew she was married. In fact, I overheard them on the recordings discussing her foolish husband and planning how to deal with me when the time came for the big split. Sally and I addressed her concerns and made decisions. I advised her to prepare and file for divorce immediately. Sally and I also agreed that the private investigator's report should be handed over to the FBI at once so they could initiate an investigation into violations of campaign laws, as well as the misuse of union and city funds and resources. Sally recommended accompanying the process server when Heather was served and issuing a warning about initiating lawsuits against Mr. Douglas. She mentioned, considering his behavior may mimic that of many politicians and influential figures, he might resort to physical threats of termination from your job, or the threat of a counter-lawsuit. If you remain resolute, I anticipate he might attempt a clandestine settlement, attempting to buy you off. In such a scenario, depending on the source of his funds, we could potentially catch him on further campaign law violations. Given the unscrupulous nature of many in public office, he may try to divert campaign finances for this purpose. Sally then handed me a discreet microphone and recorder from her drawer, saying, "Keep this on you at all times and keep it operational. Conceal the microphone in your hair and hide the recorder in your car. The transmitter has a range of about half a mile. If your car goes out of range, the microphone can internally record up to 6 hours of conversation. It will transfer any internally stored recordings once you're back in range of your car. If you give me your keys, I'll arrange for someone to install the recorder in your car while we finalize things here. I also advise that you either rehire your private investigator or allow me to find one for you to continue monitoring your wife and Mr. Douglas." There are rumors circulating that Mrs. Malone might not be the first wife he's seduced, and when confronted, he has resorted to illegal tactics to resolve the situation. If we capture their plans and offers on tape this time, we might have a solid case against him and your wife. I nodded and replied, "The PI suggested the same. He's still working for me." The following Thursday morning, Sally phoned me saying, "Mr. Malone, we're prepared to file for divorce and serve your wife. Are we sticking to our plan to witness the serving and make your remarks?" "Yes, definitely. It'll bring me some satisfaction at least. I've also been contemplating the serving logistics. Wouldn't it be fitting to serve her this Friday evening at the campaign headquarters?" Sally paused briefly before responding, "No, Stan. I'm concerned that wouldn't be wise. If you serve her there and make the comments you're planning, all the campaign workers in the office will likely overhear or hear about your threats right away. It could end up in tomorrow's newspapers, putting Mr. Douglas in a difficult position. He might lose the election without any reason to either threaten you or attempt to bribe you. I suggest we wait to serve her until she's either alone or with him." "All right, I understand your reasoning. Why don't we simply monitor them and see if they're alone tomorrow night?" Heather usually doesn't return home until almost midnight on Fridays. According to the PI report, they often spend time alone in a hotel room on Friday evenings, usually the same one they used earlier in the day. Could we serve them in the room and catch them in the act? Sally agreed to have the process server and me interrupt their rendezvous in the hotel room on Friday evening. When I arrived at my office, I encountered 2 men dressed in suits waiting for me. They introduced themselves and expressed their intention to discuss the management of funds for their deceased mother. I greeted them warmly and ushered them into my office. As soon as the door closed behind us, they approached me and presented their identification as FBI agents. They wanted to talk about my involvement with Jonathan, a matter they were investigating based on information provided by my lawyer. Upon learning that I planned to accompany the process server and record the proceedings, the agents also asked me to wear a recording device to capture the conversation. This request troubled me, as it could jeopardize my scheme to profit from Jonathan, my payoff, so to speak. Unable to find a convincing reason to refuse, I reluctantly agreed to wear their wire. That evening, we trailed the oblivious couple from the campaign headquarters to the hotel. They departed the headquarters at 7 and reached the room by 7:30 with so many of us in tow that it resembled a convoy. I feared we might be recognized. Once they reached the hotel, we allowed them nearly an hour. Anticipating the moment, I brought along my camera, usually disinterested in home videos but making an exception. Just as we were about to knock, a stroke of luck intervened. The sound of the elevator opening revealed a room service waiter pushing a laden cart. As he approached the room, he glanced at us quizzically. I signaled towards the door, jesting. "Go ahead. Be our guest. We hadn't intended to disrupt Mr. Douglas's dinner. We'll return shortly." With a nod and a smile, the waiter proceeded to knock on the door. When queried by the occupant, he simply responded, "Room service." As the door opened, the waiter entered the suite. My accomplice and I lingered out of sight, waiting for him to depart. Seizing the opportunity, I prevented the door from closing as the waiter exited. Silently, we entered the room, pausing just inside the doorway, hidden from the adulterous pair. We waited until Jonathan and Heather commenced their meal before fully revealing ourselves. When we entered the room, I found that I was a little ahead. What I witnessed stunned me, disgusted me, and devastated me. Heather and Jonathan were without outerwear and were sitting at a table with a lot of dishes in front of them. They ordered some snacks, dessert, and a bottle of wine. They both looked ecstatic. I started filming when we turned the corner. Eventually, I signaled to the waiter and he entered the room. "Are you Jonathan Douglas and Heather Malone?" he asked. Heather screamed and pulled away from Jonathan. She hurried to the bed and wrapped herself in a hotel bathrobe. Jonathan cursed and jumped up angrily. "Yes, it is," he growled, "and I suggest you leave right now. How did you get here in the first place?" "Well, sir, your room service employee let us in when he left." "Didn't you hear us ask permission to enter?" "I was sure you invited us in." The waiter went further into the room and handed Heather the divorce papers. "You've been served," he said. I walked further into the room, finally getting Heather's attention. She exclaimed, "Stan, damn you. What are you doing here, and what kind of divorce talk is this? If you don't stop this madness, I'll make you regret it. You're going to lose everything, and I'm going to take it all." "No, Heather, you're not doing any of this. In fact, it would be wise for you to just sign the papers and agree to the agreement I have proposed. After I deal with you, I will come to your lover for retribution. I am suing him and his campaign for emotional damage and alienation of feelings. Fortunately, we live in a state where such lawsuits are allowed, and perhaps as a bonus, it could affect the election results. To put it bluntly, you've been taken advantage of, and now you're going to face serious consequences." Heather didn't bother to return home that evening. In fact, I didn't hear from her until the following Wednesday when she called me at work. There was no attempt at an apology or even casual conversation. As soon as I picked up the phone, she launched into it. "Jonathan and I want to meet with you regarding this situation. We've booked a meeting room at the DoubleTree Hotel for tonight. We want to resolve this so we can move forward. Be there at 7. I received no consideration. There was no inquiry about my availability for the meeting. I was simply instructed to attend. I called Sally to inform her of the call, then reached out to my FBI contact. Both Sally and the FBI urged me to attend, with Sally promising to accompany me. The FBI assured me they would have agents nearby in case things escalated. Upon my arrival at the hotel, I inquired about the location of my meeting. The receptionist directed me to the end of the hallway where the smallest meeting room was situated. As I approached, a large man stood vigilant by the door. When I attempted to enter, he halted me, informing me of a private gathering in progress. "I'm aware," I replied. "I'm Stan Malone and I'm expected to attend." After verifying my identity, the man knocked on the door and announced my presence. Although I couldn't discern the exchange inside, the door closed after a brief interaction. Turning to me, the man explained, "I must conduct a security check, sir. Please place your belongings in the tray here." After complying, I underwent a pat-down, growing increasingly frustrated and demanding an explanation for the search. The man smirked and replied, "Well, sir, given the history of attempts on political figures, Mr. Douglas prefers not to take any risks." I had a strong suspicion that I was being searched for a recorder or wire, but I refrained from asking. With my rather long hair, I had discreetly concealed the small transmitters I carried, glued to my scalp. After the search, it took almost 5 minutes before the door opened and I was granted access to the meeting room. As I entered, I noticed Heather sitting at a table and casting guilty glances in my direction. Her flushed face hinted that something was wrong. There was a familiar blush on her face that I had seen on her many times before. Just the thought of what she was probably doing fueled my anger. Heather moved to take her seat. Glancing at Jonathan, I could barely contain my rage. His eyes were gleaming with satisfaction, and there was a smirk on his lips. I knew he was enjoying the knowledge that he had just been intimate with my wife. The meeting unfolded much as Sally and I had anticipated. Jonathan initiated by threatening my job security, then escalated to physical harm, unless I improved Heather's settlement offer, and abandoned my intentions to sue him and his campaign. I reclined in my chair and addressed him firmly. Listen, mister. While you and your associates may have the capacity to harm or even eliminate me, it won't shield you. I've taken precautions and have several parcels prepared to be sent if anything happens to me or my family. Even in the event of an accident, those parcels will be dispatched. You're aware, just as I am, that you can't control every media outlet in this country. Some will publish the contents, particularly if I'm seriously injured or deceased. Your downfall is inevitable. I witnessed Jonathan's face flush with anger and recognized the familiar tightness that signaled Heather's fury, a trait I had learned to discern years ago. I grinned at them and continued speaking. I'm aware of your recent activities before my arrival, and I possess photographic evidence of those actions on multiple occasions. Furthermore, I have photos and recordings from your meeting last week at the Doubletree with the union and senior members of the city administration. Do you truly believe those individuals will appreciate being implicated alongside you? Let me assure you, if any harm befalls me, the documents I prepared will implicate not only my wife, but also both of you. We're well aware of the company you keep, gentlemen, of a rather unsavory nature, shall we say. Heather glared at me, and Jonathan appeared visibly uneasy. Attempting to assert himself, he retorted, You heard me. Cease your threats and handle this discreetly or face consequences. Now leave. I've made my stance clear. I grinned and rose to my feet. I locked eyes with Jonathan until a flicker of concern crossed his face. I could sense that maintaining eye contact was a struggle for him. Chuckling, I pivoted towards the door. Pausing as I opened it, I added, You know, Jonathan, I might reconsider if my wife offers an exceedingly fair settlement in the divorce. And if the fools in this town decide to elect you, they deserve whatever chaos ensues. Upon returning home, I discovered my private investigator friend waiting for me along with the FBI agent. They retrieved their recording devices, and my friend informed me, We captured everything, including Jonathan's conversation with your wife and his associates after you left. He had someone tail you, instructed to report back any incriminating findings. He's extremely anxious now. After waiting for 3 days, I ensured that Jonathan's tail was beside me as I called my lawyer. We initially talked about the divorce, but as I was wrapping up the call, I remarked, Sally, I'm fed up with waiting on that jerk. I've clearly stated my terms to him and Heather, but they're both stonewalling me. Please prepare the necessary documents and initiate legal action against Jonathan. I believe we should aim for a higher settlement amount. Let's request $10,000. That should grab his attention and make headlines everywhere. As I observed the thug trailing me, I chuckled inwardly as he fell behind and reached for his phone. I watched as he animatedly conversed and gestured. Getting into my car, I drove straight home. That evening, before even finishing my supper, Jonathan called me. He never acknowledged that his associate overheard me instructing Sally to initiate the lawsuit. Instead, he said, Listen, you, Heather and I have deliberated on our meeting and we've agreed to grant some of your requests. She'll sign the divorce papers you provided without any alterations. She'll depart from your marriage with only her personal belongings and her retirement savings from her job. I've decided to propose an out-of-court settlement if you assure me that none of this will become public. Listen, I can assure you that I won't be the one to reveal anything, but I can't guarantee that someone else won't spill the beans. There could be plenty of people out there who know about you and my wife. Here's the deal. You sign a non-disclosure agreement, and I'll transfer $1 million into your account, no questions asked. Heather will submit the divorce paperwork with your proposed settlement. I chuckled and replied, $1 million? That's peanuts. I've already instructed my lawyer to sue for $10 million in damages. I might not get that, but you'll need to offer a lot more than $1 million to get me to drop the lawsuit. Besides, I could make well over $1 million from selling the rights to my story for books and movies. All right. I reckon I can stretch it a tad more, but not by much. How about $1.7 million? I reckon I can manage that without raising too many eyebrows. I'll cook up some way to justify it as campaign expenditure. That's my final offer, though. Fair enough, but we need to act swiftly. I won't instruct my lawyer to halt her work until I see the funds in my account. Here are the details of a clandestine account in the Cayman Islands. I neglected to mention that I'd set up the account in his name, using his address. I was counting on federal investigators stumbling upon it and tracing the money trail from his campaign to the bank. Naturally, I planned to transfer the funds the moment they landed, ensuring they couldn't be traced back. Later that evening, I heard the doorbell ring. Upon answering it, I encountered the same man who had been stationed at the door during my meeting with Jonathan and Heather. He presented me with a clipboard bearing a one-page legal document. "Mr. Douglas instructed me to deliver this for you to sign," he informed me. After perusing the document, I glanced back at him. "It seems acceptable, but I'll need to confer with my attorney before signing." "Well, I'm not supposed to leave without it," he replied. With a sigh, I shut the door in his face. Heading to my office, I phoned Sally. After explaining the situation, she agreed to come to my home and review the document. It took her nearly an hour to arrive, but after examining the document, she smiled and instructed me to sign it. 3 days later, I discovered that the balance in the Cayman account was $1,700,000. On the same day, my attorney called to inform me that Heather had returned the signed divorce agreement, which was promptly filed. Since the divorce was uncontested, it was expected to be finalized in 30 days. Anticipating any potential attempts by my ex-spouse to reclaim the funds, I had already transferred the money from the Cayman account. I shifted it across the globe twice before depositing it into a different account at another Cayman bank, using a different false identity. Despite these challenging circumstances, I persevered with my work, although my productivity suffered. My commissions dwindled to nearly half of their usual amount, a decline not solely attributable to the downturn in the economy. Often, my colleagues covered for me, earning commissions on the transactions made by my clients. After the divorce was finalized, I continued to struggle with my thoughts. I found myself making more errors at work, which ended up costing me. Whenever I made a mistake in buying or selling something for a customer, I had to rectify the situation. Constantly being vigilant and fearing potential repercussions became exhausting. I lived in fear that Jonathan and his associates might seek revenge for what I had done to him. This fear intensified, particularly as the authorities prepared to take action against all involved parties. One night I sat at home pondering the rapid downturn of my life when the doorbell interrupted my thoughts. It was past 9 in the evening. Upon answering, I found Heather outside, tears streaking down her face with a sizable red mark, indicating an impending bruise. She hesitated, then murmured, "Stan, can we talk?" Initially, I was tempted to refuse and shut the door, but curiosity compelled me to hear her out. Without a word, I ushered her inside to the den, where the surveillance cameras could capture our conversation clearly. Ensuring she sat on the couch for optimal camera coverage, I settled into my chair, ready to listen. Heather sat before me, tears streaming silently down her face. After a moment, she spoke, her voice strained with emotion. "Stan, I realize it's too late, but I want to apologize for what I did to Us. I should have known better, but somehow that guy broke through my defenses. You know how I am with flirting and my ambition. He seemed to understand me perfectly, knew exactly how to manipulate me, and I fell for him deeply. He promised me a powerful job after the election if I helped him, and I got so caught up in that prospect that I lost sight of our relationship." As she continued, her sobs grew louder. "Do you remember how angry I was at you on New Year's Eve when you tried to interfere? Oh, Stan, you were late even then. The last time you pulled me away from Jonathan, it was too late. We just got back from Doug's bedroom, And this guy was able to surprise me less than 3 hours after we met. I'm really sorry. After 3 weeks of clandestine meetings, I became convinced of the necessity to align completely with him. He pledged to divorce his wife and wed me post-election. He cited electoral concerns for delaying the divorce proceedings. Enchanted by the prospect of being the mayor's spouse and potentially a senator or governor later on, I fell for it. But following the turmoil you caused, I sensed Jonathan's detachment. Tonight, at the office, I stumbled upon him in the stockroom with a young college volunteer. As always, Stan, you were right. He was feeding her the same lies he was feeding me, promising to leave his wife and marry her after the election. I got into a confrontation with them, and he ridiculed me, asking me why I thought he would ever marry a girl of easy virtue like me, especially one who had been unfaithful in the past. He offered me to stay in his life as a public relations secretary if I would behave myself and ensure a comfortable lifestyle. He taunted me by suggesting that I accept his influential sponsors as I have done in the past. His new companion laughed and I slapped him in the face, but I got it back. Stan, I realize it's too late for us, but I want you to know that I've finally come to understand things, and I'm sorry for what I did to us. To you, specifically. Stan, if you could find it in your heart to forgive me, I would really love the chance to reconcile. I knew I had a great guy in you, but there was just something about Jonathan that I couldn't resist. I got caught up in the idea of living a lavish lifestyle with him and lost all sense of reason. Heather glanced at me for a moment longer. I observed as tears silently streamed down her cheeks. Eventually, she managed a tentative smile, rose, and approached my chair. Leaning forward, she planted a gentle kiss on my cheek before hurrying out of the room and out of the house. I sat there in shock for a moment before making my way to the door just in time to see her car disappearing down the street. I sighed, wishing she had come to her senses before getting involved with that jerk and his supporters from the union and government. With a heavy heart, I turned and headed back into the den. A few days later, I reached my breaking point. I needed to escape the memories and the pain. I listed my house for sale and enlisted a real estate agent to find me a new one, free from reminders. I arranged for a team to pack my furniture for storage and another to clean the house. Additionally, I hired a crew to tend to the yard. Occasionally, I checked in with Doug or Sally. They mentioned that the feds were overseeing the investigation to ensure integrity, given concerns about police corruption. We agreed to keep my involvement confidential, using Sally's information only if absolutely necessary. Sally informed me that the feds had gathered sufficient evidence of corruption to honor our agreement. About 6 weeks after I made the decision to sell my house, I woke up to a breaking news report on all major national news channels. Federal authorities had apprehended all individuals connected to Jonathan's exploitation of Heather. They faced various charges, including but not limited to financial misconduct, corruption, abuse of authority, election law breaches, and involvement in organized crime. Jonathan was taken into custody for misappropriating campaign finances, unlawfully accepting donations, exceeding legal limits, and trading appointments to future administrative positions. Regrettably or possibly fortunately, Heather was also detained for certain infractions. I phoned Sally first thing in the morning when her office opened to get some insight into the matter. At that point, all she knew was that there were leaks coming from sources other than myself. It seemed likely that I would be in the clear regarding Jonathan and his payment to me. While he couldn't reclaim the payment, there was a possibility, even a likelihood, that I would prevail if he sued me over the non-disclosure agreement. This was because both the FBI and news outlets attributed the investigation's inception to 2 of the campaign workers. My only concern was that I might be suspected of informing on the union workers. I didn't want any unwelcome visitors showing up in the dead of night. I chuckled inwardly, reflecting on the effort I had put into discreetly slipping damning notes and documents into the stacks of paperwork being handled by certain employees. I repeated this maneuver multiple times while ostensibly searching for Heather in the office. After my conversation with Sally, I reclined in my chair with a satisfied smile. I had successfully exacted revenge on Jonathan and liberated myself from a deceitful partner, all at the expense of attorney fees. Additionally, Jonathan's generosity had left me $1.7 million richer. Now I was at liberty to seek out a virtuous woman to marry and start a family with.